And welcome back for part 2. Now, I want to talk about, we've been talking about the fear survey schedule. I want to talk about one of the leading anger and aggression researchers in the country. This is Dr. Raymond Navaco, and he's been at University of California, Irvine since like forever. He was there, and one of my favorite professors at Irvine, Navaco, always had his office hours at lunchtime. I mean, he had enough oomph that he could say, I want to teach my class from 10:30 to noon, right? And the administration would say, yes, you teach whenever you want to, Dr. Navaco. But then he would have his office hours immediately after class at this beautiful little cafe there at UCI just off the Ring Road. And I took 3 classes with Navaco, and I was so intrigued that I always went to his office hours. I mean, I always went to his office hours twice a week, you know, for the 3 classes I took with him. And the thing that cracked me up is almost no one went to office hours. I was like the only one there. So here I am alone with Dr. Navaco over lunch. It was the bitchinest thing on the planet. And I really couldn't understand why people weren't there, because it was so cool to talk to him about his experiences, and he's been everywhere and done everything, and wacky guy. Deals with all kinds of criminal offenders, right? Assesses their anger, designs therapeutic interventions. He's like this marvelous blend of social psychologist, forensic psychologist, and clinical psychologist, all freaking wrapped into one. It's freaking awesome. Anyway, one exception, there was one quarter when Edja typically joined us, and Edja was an amazing young woman. She was from Croatia, and this is during the late 90s when the whole Balkans area was up in flames. And boy, did Edja tell us some stories about Croatia, being a Croat, and Navaco knew about all of this because he's so internationally oriented. Anyway, so Navaco develops the Navaco anger scale and the provocation inventory. And the idea of the Navaco anger scale, and when you're dealing with violent offenders and you want to design therapy, you got to kind of figure out what sets them off. What's the offender's anger experience, right? So the Navaco anger scale measures the general inclination towards anger reactions. 48 items on this, right, that are divided into 3 subscales, which are in turn divided into 4 sections. But what does it measure? The cognitive subscale measures, to the extent people, how they justify their anger, to what extent do they ruminate on offenses, what is the nature of their hostile attitude or undue suspicion. The arousal subscale measures a different component of the anger response, right? Anger intensity, duration, somatic tension, that is tenseness in the body, and irritability. Notice these are more tied to physiological aspects of the anger. The behavior scale often measures what would be considered the output of the anger, that is impulsive reaction. Do they employ verbal aggression, physical confrontation, indirect expression, right? And then finally, one's ability to regulate the anger, and this is the robustness of their inhibitory processes or lack thereof. So this is what happens when someone gets angry. But when you're dealing with offenders and you're trying to create interventions, what might also be important is what gets them started in the first place. And that's the provocation index. And there's a link here, so if you want to go check out the provocation index on your own, you're more than welcome to do so, right? It assesses the nature of anger activating stimuli. And remember, in this class, I've had us link a stimuli to an emotional response. And you know, that's grown out of a lot of things that I've learned in studying psychology for all these years, and it's partly inspired by Navaco, right? So the provocation index assesses the nature of anger activating stimuli, possesses X number of subscales, right? Disrespectful treatment. To what extent does disrespectful treatment get your goat? To what extent does that piss you off? To what extent does unfairness piss you off? And notice there's multiple questions that all tap into these areas. Frustration, annoying traits of others, and irritations. What do you think? What is the one that's most likely to set you off? What category here? I really don't like unfairness. That might be my top one here. out of all of them. But notice that we probably all differ in this, right? And here's a book, right? Beyond Anger, a guide for men. So how to free yourself from the grip of anger and get more out of life. And you can see the idea here is to design interventions. And of course, what's the mascot for UCI? If you don't know by now, there he is, Pete the Anteater. And what's the school motto? It'd be that simple, Zot. And what is Zot? It's the sound of an anteater's tongue hitting an ant. So that's probably, knowing that, worth the entire cost of this course. What do you think? Not so much? All right. Well, fine. Be that way. Let's talk about non-conscious emotion in the lab. This was my dissertation. And for better or for worse, this was my dissertation. I was trying to demonstrate that non-conscious emotions exist. Maybe. Not so much. We're kind of inconclusive on the results of the hypothesis. I will say this, that there was another guy working on this simultaneously in the Netherlands. Dietrich Stoppel, Dr. Stoppel was working on this. I remember he was speaking to us at a colloquium. He was giving a talk at Ohio State. And I was fascinated to see this talk because he was trying to demonstrate non-conscious emotions, and he was doing visual priming, which is what I was doing in my research. And it was weird because he gave his talk, and I'd added in something that he hadn't added in, and I thought it was really important. And as he finished his talk and said, well, any questions, comments? And I went to raise my hand, and my advisor, Marilyn, was sitting next to me, and it was so weird because she's sitting next to me, and I go to raise my hand, and she grabs my hand, and she holds it down. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I look at her, and she says, time for you to be quiet. And I'm like, okay. She does not want me to share what I know with Stoppel. That was a very strange experience. That caught me by surprise. Later, Stoppel was demonstrated to have made up data for numerous studies, published many articles on, and he was drummed out of the business. That didn't have anything to do with what we're talking about now, but that was just really weird. I thought we were supposed to share ideas, not be secret about them. But so let's return to that Rucker-Polifroni hypothesis. Does anger lead to retributive type punishment? Yeah, we got plenty of evidence for that. Does fear lead to incapacitating type punishments? No, it doesn't seem to. Every time we put people in a fear condition, they behaved identically as people who were in the anger condition. And that made no sense because I know fear and anger are different, and I'm pretty certain that they should cause different responses. But the responses were identical in every laboratory paradigm we employed. So every time we tried to prime fear, it failed to differentiate from anger in our measures. It just didn't make sense. Didn't make sense until, and this is where it pays to be mindful and analyze your own real-world experiences. So, one morning on the way to school, I remember I had a midterm in my first class, and I got out of the door about 5 minutes late. I had my midterms with me, and I was going to go straight to class and give the midterm, and I hate being late, one of my pet peeves, right? So I'm on my motorcycle, and that's not me, but that's a picture of a person on a motorcycle, so let's call it close enough. And I was headed up Hague, going up to get on the freeway to go to school, and the light, as I came to the signal, it was green, and I went through the intersection, and I didn't slow down as much as I usually do. Usually I'll slow down to about 20 through an intersection on the bike, but I just kept it at 30, 35, and there was an oncoming pickup truck who decided to turn left in front of me. And boy, there's nothing you can do at that point, right? You slam on the brakes, right, because this truck is turning in front of you, and I knew I was going to hit it. It just and as I slammed on my brakes, I put too much pressure on the brake, and my back end started to come around, right, to kind of fishtail, and that's what happens if you put too much brake on the motorcycle at one time. And the only solution to that is you have to ease up on the back brake and employ more front brake, right, and that straightens you out. So I successfully did that. So, but then I'm just going to hit that truck, and the guy's in the truck, he's looking, and his eyes are big, and he's scared shitless, and I'm scared shitless, and somehow we managed to miss each other, I mean, like by an inch. and I was scared to death. But as soon as we didn't hit, and I mean the instant I realized that I was safe and I didn't hit, my first impulse was to turn the bike around, follow his ass, and beat him senseless with the helmet for turning illegally in front of me and almost killing me. But at that point in time, then there's a moment of clarity. I said I was scared to death, and then I became insanely angry in the flick of a switch in less than 1/10 of a second. And when you analyze it, you say, well, why did you become angry? I became angry because he did something stupid and it scared the shit out of me. Is it possible that fear, once we realize that the fear isn't realized, we get angry at whatever made us, the stimulus that made us afraid? And I'll go with that. So, but notice that this is a conscious process. This is a process that occurred consciously. So does fear become anger? Based on our experience in the lab, fear manipulations weren't working as expected. They were leading to anger. Anecdotal evidence, as I just presented, indicate that fear readily and quickly morphs to anger. I mean, is this a conscious conversion? Then perhaps we can study non-conscious fear, because if people aren't aware that they're afraid, then they wouldn't attempt to convert it to anger because they're not aware they're afraid. But then the big issue is there such a thing as non-conscious emotions? Or are there emotions that affect us outside of our awareness? And now that really opened up a whole can of worms. Because Rucker left, so we stopped working on what we were working on, and now it's coming time for me to do dissertation, and I said, why don't I demonstrate non-conscious emotions in the laboratory? So, the conceptual, simulate approach, freeze, avoidant movements. So what I'm going to do is bring participants in, and I'm actually going to have them move, and participants are either going to continuously step forward or be assigned to a condition where they step backwards, and then the control condition would be where they remain stationary. And I have to supply them a reason for stepping forward or stepping backward. And we created a story that this is an experiment on reaction time. And 1/3 of the people were instructed, randomly assigned, if you see a flash, when you see a flash on the computer screen, step forward onto the sensor and then step backwards as quickly as you can, and we're going to measure your reaction time. The other 1/3 of the people we told to do the same thing, but they were stepping backwards. And we developed this board with electronic components and sensors, etc. None of it worked. We didn't measure any reaction time. We just wanted our participants to believe that we were. Okay? The people who were in the control condition were told to remain stationary, and we just handed them a button that was hooked up to a wire, and they were supposed to press the button every time they saw the flash. So participants had a good reason to be there. Oh, I see. We're just moving as quickly as we can, and they're measuring our reaction time. Okay, we don't have to search for what they're actually trying to do, because it's very obvious what they're doing in this experiment. And that's a good cover story. That's what social psychology often relies upon in the laboratory. Now, the flash on the screen that they're responding to was the same thing that Dietrich Stoppel was doing. That is, what we're doing is using subliminal priming. We're priming emotion-voking images. That is, we're flashing these images on the screen so quickly that you can't consciously perceive them. But the visual thalamus does perceive them and sends a non-conscious signal down to the amygdala. So the idea was the timing's critical in presentation of the image. And let me turn sideways here. What we're trying to do then is, okay, so we activate the retina, right? And that then transduces the sensory information, sends it along the optic nerve, hits the visual thalamus really quickly processed down to the amygdala. If it's a fear-evoking image, then it should cause response in the amygdala and the thalamus, right? The visual thalamus. And then the signal continues more slowly back to the visual cortex where it's processed and presents a conscious presentation. So non-conscious is fast, right? But conscious is slower. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot, and we effectively created the mechanism to get this done. So participants then are assigned to one of 3 movement conditions. Hey, we want you to step forward. 1/3 of people are said, we want you to step back. The other 1/3 are said, we want you to stand and press the button, right? And then participants are also one of 4 emotion conditions: fear, anger, happy, or neutral. Later studies we did some work with disgust, etc. But the idea was, if they're behaving in a manner that's consistent, that is, stepping forward for anger or stepping backward for fear, that should prime the emotion more strongly than inconsistent, like stepping forward for fear, right, or stepping backward for anger. Happy approach, right? So it really is inspired by emotion action tendencies, as we've discussed in class, right? The design is fully crossed, so you could be step forward anger, you could be step backward anger, stationary anger. Ultimately, 4 times 3, there's 12 separate conditions, and we ran about 400 participants in the initial study, right? Only but Ohio State do we get that number of participants to run in our experiments. So, independent variables then, step forward on that board, and the image is presented. 3 images consistent with the emotional conditions, so 3 different images to represent fear or 3 different images to represent anger, and they were presented for 15 milliseconds, which allows for non-conscious detection, but too short for conscious detection. If we use a pattern mask, we destroy the iconic or visual memory you've probably learned about, and thereby we keep the exposure of the image. So let's try it out. Here's some pictures we used. What condition would this be? This was the anger condition, right? But already we got problems. And I didn't anticipate these problems, and this is why good studies you probably have to run and then modify and run again and modify again. Because, yeah, this pisses me off. If some guy gets in my grill and does this, this pisses me off. But for female participants, it's just as inclined to make them afraid. So we got an issue right off the bat, right? Check out the strange American flag. I don't know where they get their American flags to burn in foreign countries, but it's not probably manufactured in the United States. Anyway, these would be then the fear images. So 3 of these are shown, and they're shown at intervals of 3 to 8 seconds, right? And it's done for 20. So each image is shown about 8 times, any 3 of those images. What about happy? Let's do the happy condition. What could be happier than a birthday cake, right? Or what could be happier than the happiest place on earth? And that would be Disneyland. Or Disney World, right? And if that baby doesn't make us happy, what else could make us happy? Let's try the neutral condition, and now we need images, but they should have no effect, and we settled on some kitchenware, and I don't think that's going to cause a huge emotional experience in anybody. So, how do we know that this is working? Well, we are going to follow up immediately. As soon as they finish the reaction time experiment, they're told go ahead and sit down and answer the questions on the computer. Well, the first thing they do is they watch this little stick figure cartoon, and we ask them what stick figure A is feeling towards stick figure B, and there's no way to know because these stick figures don't have faces, so there's no emotional expression. But the projective test is, the notion here is, if I've been primed with fear, and I'm not aware that I've been primed with fear, it's at a non-conscious level, and then you show me this stupid ambiguous cartoon, and I say, what is the stick figure A feeling towards stick figure B? You're going to go, I don't know. They don't have faces. How the hell am I supposed to know? And I say, well, if you had to guess, right? If you had to guess, what is they feeling? And people would, and see, the idea is, though, if fear is sitting there non-consciously, bubbling away in the non-conscious, the projective test, they should be projecting that onto the stick figure. And I say, I don't know why. I don't know why. There's no indication that this is the way, but I don't know why, but I think they're showing fear. Or I think they're showing anger. So the projective test was to pick up on the non-conscious. And what's the most famous projective test ever? The Rorschach. Ink blots, right? Well, we didn't want to go there. We had a different way of doing it. And this was one of the biggest flaws in my dissertation, is I created the manipulation. I also created the dependent measure. Neither had been established, and that's kind of a boo-boo. If you want to create a manipulation, then use a pre-existing dependent measure. If you want to create a new dependent measure, then use a pre-existing manipulation. If you create for new on both ends, who knows what's going to happen. So then participants took the PANIS, and the PANIS, I'm going to show you in just a minute, is the Conscious Emotional Experience Questionnaire. Other questions, and these were just kind of tack-ons at the last minute as I'm designing the study. I thought, why don't I just ask, how well do you think you did on reaction time? And then the gold standard question, I had no way of anticipating this, and I had no hypotheses about this question, was how comfortable were you performing the activity? Okay, so PANIS, what is it? After they assign the emotion, the projective test, to the stick figure, then we check for conscious detection. Right? Because what we're looking for is non-conscious, picked up by the projective measure, but then we should see no results on the PANIS because they shouldn't be conscious of the emotion. So tricky, but so each, and in the PANIS instruction, read each item and list a number from the scale below next to the word, indicate to what extent you feel that way right now, that is at the present moment, or indicate the extent you've felt this way over the past week. Right? That's the genuine PANIS, we said at this moment, and solely. And then it just gives them a list of emotions. It's got 20 different emotions, and what we're looking at is, do they feel this emotion now? So what I'm looking for is, I want you to say, in the fear condition, I want you to say the stick figure is afraid, and then when we look at the PANIS, I don't want to see any evidence of fear. Okay? And that means that we got non-conscious results, but not conscious. So conscious emotional experience measured via the PANIS, non-conscious via the projective test. So here is, and I can't run the video anymore for the software. I don't have the software to run the video, so I just got a couple frames here. So this is how the cartoon starts out, and notice it's about 30 frames, right? And it just goes through, and we see the stick figure approaching. Finally the stick figure stops at this distance from the other stick figure. They're both facing the same way. There should be nothing in their body language to really tell us anything. There's no expressions on the face. And then we say, what is person A feeling towards person B? And if the person says fear and they're in the fear condition, I'm going, that's a solid, I'll rock on that result, right? But if they don't, then alas, back to the drawing board. Okay. Then they do the PANIS. Participants then are directed to step forward as quickly as possible. Let's take a look then. Here is the flash on the screen. Now again, this computer is not capable of doing this. We use a program in the lab called DirectRT, so we can present images. We can actually say, I want this image presented for 15 milliseconds. It computes the computer's clock speed and makes the adjustment to do it. Right? So, are you ready? Here we go. This is what the participant would see. Ready? Goes to a white screen, and now the image is presented, followed by the pattern mask to blow the image off the retina, so there's no lingering visual effects. This was necessary or people would see the image. You like that? Let's try that again. So here we go. 15 milliseconds, pattern mask 50 milliseconds. So this is going to happen, and notice the images. What do you think? We got a shark. That's pretty scary. I think we're in the fear condition. We got the dog, that's pretty scary. We got the snake, that's pretty scary. And notice we went to primal fear, really kind of trying to stack the deck in our favor. So, what do we find? Well, participant watches the projective cartoon, they fill out the PANIS, they answer some supplemental questions, they're funnel debriefed, and that is, hey, that flash on the screen, can you describe it for me? And every individual in the experiment was debriefed, all 400 individually. Can you describe it? And people say, oh, I saw a flash. It looked like maybe broken glass. They detected the pattern mask. That's fine, right? So we funnel debrief. We're good to go. We thank them for their participation. Okay. You want to see the results? Well, you got to come back for part 3.